What is going on, everybody? 'Tis I, the enigma of the gun airwaves, Miyanovich, welcoming you to Season 3 of the Liberal Gun Owners Lens podcast, where unprecedented perspectives are packed into the cargo hold for the LGO Lens spaceship Voyagio.
That's fucking Italian.
Don't believe that evolution is possible with guns and public safety in America? It's already happening, y'all. Minds are evolving. Think guns versus public safety is the only game in town, do ya? Think culture war is the big boss, do ya? Then keep your ass in the past. Everyone else, all aboard! Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Liberal Gun Owners Lens podcast. 'Tis Miyanovich here again with you. Glad to be here. So we are going to be moving on briefly from the talk and discussion regarding the 2024 election. I will have some more podcasts that are related to the election in the upcoming month or so. However, we are going to go back to our previously scheduled vibe, and we are going to talk about the guns. And today's guest is a guest who needs no introduction. He is the Professor David the Yamane. David published a book this year called Gun Curious, a liberal professor's surprising journey inside America's gun culture. We're just going to call the book Gun Curious because that other shitter is a little bit too long to say every time when you have to say the shits. So David is our guest today, and I'm talking to you because you need to know a few things before we get into this discussion. There's some insider talk going on, specifically with two things in this episode, or these upcoming many episodes with David, where we basically talk the ears off of fucking corn. So there's going to be like 3 or 4 episodes. But there are two insider pieces here that you need to know about. One, the first thing I should say is this episode was recorded before the election. So if you notice that it's two sleepy men in their 50s talking kind of vibe, then that's why. This is recorded before the election. So it doesn't have any spark or spice or any feeling of emergency or anything like that. No doom vibes going on. So the two things that you need to know other than that are, prior to this being recorded, David and I recorded a segment with France Televisions, which is a video segment with them. And France Televisions is the leading conglomerate of independent and public television in France. They contacted me after the Wall Street Journal piece where I was quoted. So they came to North Carolina and we filmed a segment at David's house and at David's gun range for them about left of center American gun ownership. So we are joking a bit and mentioning French TV and the French segment in this episode. The other thing that you're going to hear in this episode is the following phrase: Hitler's nuts. And you're going to ask yourself, why are they saying Hitler's nuts a number of times? Well, whenever I give my lecture at David's Sociology of Gun course in Wake Forest, I have a tendency to bring up a point. And that point is that there are people in this world who don't think that guns should be in society. And there are people in this world that think that guns should be a part of society. Or perhaps there are people in this world that recognize that guns just are a part of society. Guns are a part of every society, by the way, not just in America. There isn't a society on the planet currently, other than these really rare hunter-gatherer scenarios where the society doesn't have guns involved. Anywho, I typically bring up the point in David's class that it doesn't matter who you're dealing with. Nobody seems to have a problem that America went over to Germany and handled the Nazis with guns, right? So this absolutist viewpoint about guns shouldn't even be on the planet. Well, the same kind of person, if you ask them whether or not America should have went over and took care of Hitler with the guns, they'll say, oh, no, yeah, they should have done that. That's okay. But other than that, or something hypocritical and contradictory like that. But that whole concept typically comes out of my mouth something like this. Nobody seems to have a problem that the United States went over to Germany and fed Hitler his own nuts. Or fed Hitler his own balls. Something like that. So I said in my lecture this year to David's class, I did say Hitler's nuts. And then there's also something else that I didn't want to go into that made it funnier. It would take too long to describe it. I would need visuals and stuff. So in this episode, you're going to hear us talking about French people or the French television people, and you are going to hear the phrase Hitler's nuts. And now you know why. If you come to see 2 lectures, in one of those lectures, 50% of the time, I will say, feed Hitler his own nuts or feed Hitler his own balls. On that note, since we're talking about balls, let's talk about some real balls. Not tennis balls, although we kind of talk about tennis balls also, but real balls. Because this guy, Professor David Yamane, has a real set. Anybody that's in the liminal space between the libs and the cons, between the anti-gunners and the pro-gunners, dealing with the horse shit related to guns in the United States of America. Anybody who's doing that, and by the way, it's very challenging. As you know, there are multiple black holes trying to suck the soul and motivation and morale out of us when we're doing these kinds of things. David does it. He continues to do it. And even though he pays prices for it, he perseveres. And he is an irreplaceable part of the movement to get progress at the nexus between guns and public safety. He is a man who has a set on him, even though it seems like he's so chill and laid back. He's got a real spine and a real set. So without further ado, let's talk to that set of balls. Join me for this conversation, won't you? With my friend, Professor David Balls. David Yamane, welcome to the Liberal Gun Owners Lens podcast, man. It's great to have you back here.
Well, Randy, there are very few things that give me great pleasure in life, and this is certainly one of them.
Fantastic. I love that you feel that way. So we are here definitely today to talk about Gun Curious, a liberal professor's surprising journey inside America's gun culture. We're going to talk about that today. We'll talk about other things. There are some positive things we're going to talk about, some negative things we're going to talk about. What I wanted to start off with is talking to you about your book tour. So you launched a self-financed limited book tour in the United States of America and went to some different places. I was there for two of those gigs, the original gig in your hometown and then the one in Sylvan, North Carolina. How did in your estimation, or your observation, how did your book tour go for Gun Curious?
Well, I'd say, the whole process, again, as you say, from soup to nuts was a real roller coaster. Lots of, highs, lots of lows. And I think the book tour really had some elements of both. On the one hand, I had this dream of getting in my pickup truck and, driving across the country to see my mom and sisters out in California and just hitting bookstore after bookstore along the way. And I started trying to plan that out and contacting bookstores and really sort of struck out at every turn. And so the idea of doing a cross-country book tour really sort of fizzled out. Now, on the positive side, and it is true that the saying is that you shouldn't have a book launch, at least, any place that you wouldn't have a birthday party. And so, where it was really successful for me was, 3 of the 4 events I did, I guess not counting what I did at the NRA, which we can talk about as a sort of separate deal. But, the launch I did in my hometown here, Winston-Salem, also in Mocksville, where Sandy's from and where we currently live, and then out in Half Moon Bay in California, those were really home games, and the turnouts were great. Over 30 people showed up to each of those. But, it was a lot of people that I knew, a lot of people that Sandy knew, a lot of people who in California people I went to high school with, or, friends of my parents and sisters. And so that was great, because a lot of them were not bought into guns in any way, shape, or form. They were really there just to support me. So it was a good opportunity to sort of spread the word about what I'm talking about in that book. And then there was the one bookstore up in the mountains that you went to that event, City Lights Books. And That was awesome event, because that was the one bookstore that I just randomly contacted with no particular connection to the area, that said, absolutely, let's do it. And, filled the room. And again, had a great conversation with, a few people like you and John Richardson and Barb Richardson who knew me, but a lot of people who just are, supporters of that bookstore or interested in the book. So, again, in terms of the events that were held, amazing, loved them. I think really useful and productive conversation across different views on firearms, but a little disappointing in the sense that I wasn't able to get into more bookstores to do events, and that I think is a downstream result of the entire kind of debacle of trying to get the book published in the first place.
I think the further that we go, the more that the veil is lifted, and the more that we realize just how effective guns are, right, to people's mindsets. Like the whole phenomenon of guns and public safety that we deal with, we don't realize exactly how it really pushes people one way or the other, or into disinterest, or into what I would just say is avoidance. I think more than anything, people just avoid dealing with it because it's too much to consider. And so outside of these pre-established pockets of advocacy and excitement, you have everyone else, almost the entire country. And people just are trying to avoid it, or they don't have interest. They don't want the hassle. So when you have a situation like your situation, with whether we're dealing with the publishing bullshit that you went through, or potentially you're trying to book a tour and people really aren't up for it or whatever, this is what we're seeing.
Yeah, I think, what you're, I think, pointing to is this negative polarization that exists in the broader society today, and really guns being drawn up into that as one of the major wedge issues that drives people one way or the other. That's the sort of downside of that situation. I think the one thing that tends to get lost in that is the other thing I think you're mentioning too, is that a lot of people are just disaffected, that they don't want to jump into that polarized mess. Under better circumstances, they might be perfectly happy to engage on the issue of guns, try to understand how different people see the issue, try to find some common ground. But it's just it's so risky that it's not worth the possibility of, like, if I start a discussion with this person, where is it going to go? Is it going to go anywhere productive? And too often it doesn't. So I totally understand why people just opt out on guns and politics in general.
Right. I think, although it's not quite as jagged, this is a jagged example I would give. It is in this, in my opinion, it's in the same league or in the same playing field as if you had come out with a book called Abortion Curious. Like, how well are you doing on a fucking book tour if your book is called Abortion Curious? Or and the people, perhaps the bookstores you're trying to get into, are like all in red states or red areas. Like, how's that going to go? It's not going to go very well. Maybe that book is extraordinarily insightful and important, but people just won't be able to get past the fucking title. Well, Gun Curious isn't quite that jagged, but for some people, it's almost there. So this is why I think, in terms of morale and valuing what you've done, and I think you've gone through this process now. I've been going through it for years. We need to understand that and take a breath before we go, what's this worth? Because if we go with the way people are reacting to it, we're not going to see the value.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely been times on this roller coaster where I was just ready to jump off. And, if hadn't committed so much of my life already to it, it would have been a lot easier to jump off. But it was kind of like, I've come too far. I'm not getting out now, and then even, when the book came out, I said, well, I'm going to take the rest of the year, just promote the book and try to decide, whether I stay in the area and keep trying to bring light or jump off and do something that might be better for my, personal and mental health.
Yeah.
But, it's definitely a challenge, especially I think as someone who, I just think of myself as a, standard issue 1980s card carrying liberal, not a progressive, not a radical, maybe in these days even center left, maybe have been pushed in that direction some. But I always think of, liberals are supposed to be the open-minded ones, right? And that idea of being curious about something. If liberals aren't curious, who's going to be curious? And yet, to your point, when it comes to the issue of guns, a lot of my fellow liberals just want to put their fingers in their ears and go, la 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 la, I don't hear you, I don't hear you. There's an astounding lack of curiosity about guns themselves, and that's been probably the biggest disappointment of the whole process, because it's sort of being gate kept by your own people.
Yeah. And Chuck Rossi said something great when he was on the podcast. He said he was talking about the C-suite executives in Silicon Valley and what their attitudes are about guns. And he said most of them don't even want to spend the energy to be an anti-gunner. They don't even want to go that far. They just wish guns would fucking go away. They just want guns to fucking go away. They don't want to even go into it and be an activist for public safety. They just think that it's an annoying fucking thing that's unnecessary, and we're wasting too much time on it, and it should just fucking go away. And that was one of the, and he used the F word certainly because it was Chuck, but very insightful about that kind of an attitude, because that is what many people want. Many of our fellow liberals, so we could have the conversation. I do not think that a lot of people who vote for the Democrats or who believe themselves to be liberal are actually what I would consider liberal, because of something related to the open-mindedness you're talking about. It sort of disqualifies them. But a lot of people that are quote unquote liberal have that attitude. I just want it to fucking go away. So why I'm bringing that up is it's beautiful that Chuck brought that up, because of what it shows is the lack of effort on their part. They don't even want to. They're not curious. They don't want us to even open the brain. They just want to go, God, that's fucking annoying. Get it away.
Yeah. And, I think and on the other side as well, that the book has definitely been much more warmly received by people who are in the gun culture. And, that's great, because I from the outset, I wanted to write a book that someone who was in the gun culture would say, yeah, that's accurate and fair. Maybe not complete, but that's fine. I can only do so much. And I think the reviews have largely been, yeah, this is accurate and fair and helpful, but also, a partial reading as well. So there's only, I think, a curiosity about it from that side, to the extent that it just reinforces what people already think, and almost sort of when people start saying that I'm like John Lott, then I feel like they haven't gotten the point.
Yeah.
And that's definitely not a comfortable, comparison for me, because I don't think we're doing really the same kind of thing. And, so I don't think the lack of curiosity is a partisan issue. But again, it's harder for me to see that, because the book has been so much more warmly welcomed and promoted from within the gun culture.
And it's so reasonable. The book is so reasonable. And like all of your work, it's clear, it's simple, it's intelligent, it leaves a lot of space for people. It's inviting, it's guiding and supportive. Like all of that stuff is in the book. And it's a Rorschach test for what the fuck is going on with people's predeterminations. So it doesn't matter what, if you were like Hemingway or something in there and it was just off the planet writing, there was just, they wouldn't even be able to see it then. But what interested me about going to the 2 gigs that I went to was, number one, not everybody in the room was a liberal. And number 2, everybody was cool and appreciative. So that was a very nice indication to me about things that we've talked about before, that we know that if you're going to generalize, you get yourself into trouble. I think there are a lot more people out there on the right that are more moderate, that are totally cool with your book and like, hey, thanks, man. This is really good stuff. I think there are probably more people on the left that would be there too. But I think there definitely is something about liberal psychology that it's interesting. It flips, because typically if you're listening to like Jonathan Haidt talk, liberals are open-minded and the right-wingers are closed-minded. But in this instance, I'm finding that moderate conservatives actually seem to have a little bit more open-mindedness here, obviously, because most of them are probably gun owners, right? But they're not that they're not that big of gun owners. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like, I wouldn't say, I'll use John as an example. John Richardson isn't like out on the gun range blasting the Freedom Biscuits constantly. He's not that guy. So I just think that it was interesting for me to see that there are both types of people out there. And then also, other people I've talked about, like my neighbor who's like kind of libertarian. He was like, oh, cool. Right? He wasn't like, what motherfucker?
Yeah, I mean, I like to think that kind of response would be among the very, very extremes. But I think it is true, and I got this from, I read Ezra Klein's book Why We're Divided recently, and trying to think forward and understand this polarization better. And he talked about the same point, that one of the defining characteristics of liberals tend to be open-minded, more open to experience, not just in a mental sense, but just trying different things, welcoming new experiences, more diversity and these kinds of things, but also subject to the same kinds of biases that affect all human beings. And, he gave an example of a study that was done to show how when people are committed to a particular policy position, they basically lose the ability to do simple mathematical calculations. And one of the examples they used had to do with restrictive gun laws. And, liberals, when they were faced with a law that was sort of more open towards gun carry, were not able to sort of do basic math. They had to fit the law and its consequences into their pre-existing framework, which was anti-gun. So, maybe for my whole life, I've given liberals too much credit for being open-minded.
Yeah. There's a tremendous graph. I can't remember the guy that devised it. I'd have to look through my notes, but it's a graph that plots out the life of an innovation, a successful innovation. And in the graph, you have the initial period kind of skyrockets. People get excited about the innovation, and then it tops out. And then when the real grind of the world starts to happen, and you have to bring that into innovation into the status quo and people's conflicts of interest and financial desires and whatever, it tops out. Then it starts to go down, right? It goes down into the innovation goes down into a valley. And so right there is where you lose most people that are in charge of the innovation or a part of it. They bail because they thought it was just going to be up and up and up or up and plateau or whatever. But it comes up and then it goes down into the valley. What ends up being the innovations that truly stick and be the ones that and the innovations that change the world and change paradigms are the people that are involved in the innovation that fucking stick with the idea after it goes down to the bottom of the valley. If you stick and hold, it will turn back up. And then you have to really push to get it out of the valley. And then it does grow, but right, it does come out of the valley, but it's a much more moderate incline. So that is what I think about this stuff with the guns. What would be my examples? Well, your work would be an example. LGO would be an example. And Walk the Talk America would be. These are all very good examples in my mind of what I would consider an innovation in guns, right? Because Michael Sodini is doing strongly. He's in a strong position now. Not perfect, but strong. I was there in the valley in those conversations with him, and he was having the same feelings that you were, where you're like, I want to fucking bail. And I have had that feeling once a week. Every week I've been involved with liberal gun owners. I need to get out of this. This is bullshit. But look at what's happening with Mike. What Michael has going on right now is pretty phenomenal for the gun world. It's phenomenal. It might not be changing all the minds and all the hearts, but what they've been able to do is phenomenal. I feel the same way about your work, as I've told you, and we'll talk about more of that later. I think this is a matter of holding on and just one foot in front of the other and working through that valley that everybody that's going to make a big paradigm impact has to go through. Right? That's what I feel like with you.
Well, yeah, I appreciate the support, and the comparisons. Obviously, flattering, and it's hard to know from the inside where you're at in that. Because I definitely feel the ups and downs, and right. I'd say right now I feel pretty good. I had a good last month. Got an opportunity to get out and talk to lots of different kinds of groups, and really made me feel like that under the right conditions that people are receptive to new ways of thinking forward on these issues rather than always fighting yesterday's battles.
I think eventually what will happen, it won't happen en masse, but one person at a time, one journalist at a time, one world beater at a time, one big brain at a time, one influential person at a time. People will realize that they need something. They need this, is basically what I'm saying. They need David Yamane's brain. They need the perspective, because what's out there is fucking beat, and it's just going nowhere. Like you said, yesterday's thinking, yesterday's patterns. Eventually, people will give up and be like, we need some kind of a fresh something. And how do we know? How do I know that that's what's going to happen? Because that's what's been happening. I'm not just making that up. Like, I have been testing it for years, one person at a time, one conversation at a time. People are going, I'm so tired of the way things have been. I'm so refreshed by this way of doing it or this conversation. I just think we need to stay with it, as long as we can.
I thought that might have come from your tarot card readings. And I was gonna
my tea leaves, my mate leaves. I think it's there. And who knows, man? Who knows what's going to happen after this fantastic France television's piece that you and I did together? It might start a fire worldwide for demand for our personalities. And
well, we're certainly counting on some amazing editing, and also the voiceovers in French really have a lot of potential for going forward and launching the brand,
grabbing people's hearts, their minds, maybe their sexual curiosity. Who knows? It could be anything.
I feel I was talking to you about this friend of mine, one of my closest friend in sociology, is in Wales for this quarter, and he's has occasion to just talk to people about different things, and he sometimes will mention my book, as a good friend would. And he says he finds a lot of curiosity among the people he's talking to who are English or Welsh, just about American gun culture. And I think that this was reflected some in this French television crew, that because guns are not the political wedge that they are here in those countries, and that they don't, maybe because they don't have the ongoing gun violence issue, that it just seems like the people are more open just to being like, what the hell? They, not that they understand it,
right,
but about the curiosity side of the equation, right? They're like, what? This is sort of interesting, and tell me more about that.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe the politicization and the gun violence that school shootings just makes it a different sort of conversation in the US than it is in other countries.
It just creates ice mostly for me. Like I don't hardly ever tell anyone what I do. And even when I'm like, oh, I'm in a situation where I can say this straight to somebody's face, they look at me with deer in the headlights, and it's an impossible way to work, to get things to move forward. So you have to go around that. You have to figure out a way to go around it. At least from my perspective, my experience. But it is so deeply ingrained in people's minds. We are traumatized. We're in disbelief. I mean, once you have these school shootings for year after year for 2 decades, it can't but help to get inside of everybody's mind in very deep and powerful ways. So, and I've said this recently to somebody somebody in the community I've been emailing with, and I think I'm safe to say that I'm not going to mention him, but he has family member who engaged a mass shooting at work. So we've been having those conversations, very deep conversations. We've only been doing this for 20 years. Like this new trauma is only 20 years old. And I don't know if we were in a phenomenal position with the nexus between guns and public safety, if we were always all working together well with it, if we would be able to solve this problem in 20 years with that kind of a political reality, let alone a dysfunctional one that gets more dysfunctional every year. So I'm bringing that up because I just hope everybody realizes that this is a kind of a problem that you have to solve over decades. And we're just 20 years into it.
Oh. And yeah, I might also just say, like, as you've used the term, the wicked problem of gun violence or school shootings or mass shootings, wicked problems are not easily solvable. And so, it's almost an issue of reducing the problem as opposed to solving the problem, because, humans being humans and having access to firearms, the problem will never be fully solved, I don't think. It's in the popular imagination now. It's a cultural script. If you're disaffected and you want, to commit suicide and take some people out with you, there's, that genie can't be put back in the bottle. But, there doesn't mean that there aren't ways of addressing that and reducing that. And yeah, this backward-looking, forward-looking thing, I totally understand why there are people in the gun community today who were fighting, legit battles for gun rights in the 60s, 70s. Well, probably not the 60s. Those people are dead. 70s, 80s, 90s. They remember the assault weapons ban, and they remember handgun bans in DC and Chicago. And so I don't begrudge them their culture warrior attitude and them seeing, behind, every Democrat as a gun banner. But I'm not burdened by those life experiences and memories, and I'm happy to look forward and collaborate with whoever is willing to try to find ways of addressing these problems that respect gun owners' rights. And I think that this is the future. This is where a lot of people are at, and it's just a matter of people recognizing that, it's okay to work with people with whom you might disagree on certain things. And poor Mike Sodini has to deal with, people wanting him to be pure, a pure 2A gun rights advocate when he's trying to get things done.
Let's circle back to your book for a second. Let's talk about the fucking stonewall from big publishing. Let's talk about the stonewall. So what was the number of number of places that you guys tried?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have to say before I say the number that, this was a whole different way of doing things for me. I never have written a trade book. I've written lots of academic books. You sell, 500, 600 copies. The publisher's really ecstatic about that. But, trade publishing is different. If you sell 5,000 copies of a trade book, that's your break-even point. And so, I have to get an agent to represent the book to publishers. You can't just go to a publisher directly. And so I was fortunate to get one of the biggest and most prominent nonfiction literary agents in New York at one of the biggest literary agencies, and so I'm going into this thinking this guy sells all kinds of projects. He's like a top 5 guy every year for 20 years or something like that. And, he shows me this is how you write a proposal. 70,000 words, get that together. He's like, this is good. And so I'm super optimistic, that not that everybody's going to want it, but that someone's going to want it. So he starts sending them out, 5, 6 at a time to, various different publishers, go through round, nobody wants it, go through another round, nobody wants it, go through another round. So, we're getting to be over 30, toward the end, and it ended up being 33 publishers passed on the book. And, to the point where he clearly had no idea what to do, because I don't think he's probably ever represented anybody where 33 publishers passed on. If he's willing to take someone on, that's like a stamp of approval, and the publishers can trust his judgment, right, and go forward with some publisher. So at the end, when the 33rd publisher passed on it, he's like, I don't know what to do at this point. And, so that was, again, on that roller coaster, that was a moment where I thought, I have to either completely redo the project or I have to self-publish it, because I'm basically out of options.
You went with a very cool local publisher, yes?
Yeah. So, I'm in my trying to figure out which way to go. I randomly just got a LinkedIn message from someone who said, hey, I see you teach at Wake Forest. I graduated from Wake Forest as a sociology and psych major. My kid went to Wake Forest, and I am an executive editor at this publisher here in Jefferson, North Carolina. And are you by any chance working on a book on gun culture? And I said, oh, well, as a matter of fact. But I said, hey, before we even sort of go down any kind of path, I've had a lot of trouble getting any interest in this book. So I want to sit down with you and tell you about it. And then you tell me whether you even want to see the proposal. And so I go meet her and I say, hey, look, this book is not, it's not a gun love story. I try to honestly tell the story of my journey into gun culture and tell the story of gun culture through that lens. But I definitely am not, fundamentally critical of guns. I do talk about gun violence, but that's not the driving force. The idea that guns are normal is the driving force of the book. And she's like, oh yeah, that's fine. I'm a 3rd generation North Carolina. My grandparents own guns. My parents own guns. I own guns. It's no problem. So, they went ahead and took the book on, but, and I'm grateful for that, because otherwise it would have really been either redoing the book or self-publishing it. But at the same time, this is not at the level of, a HarperCollins or, any of the big 5 publishing houses that have not just the distribution and the marketing, but also the cachet that places like the New York Times, the Washington Post, or the Atlantic, or the New Yorker, these influential media outlets that review books. They're not looking at books that are coming out of McFarland Publishers from Jefferson, North Carolina. Right. So, I talk about the downstream effects of those 33 rejections. There's no guarantee you get, reviewed in the Washington Post, but there are ways that you can be in that pool versus not in that pool. And the same thing, with the book tour, like not lots of people want to do book tours and can't get into bookstores, but if you're being published by, a big 5 publisher, it's different than if you're being published by, McFarland, which, there was issues with the pricing of the book and the distribution and other things that made it harder to get into people's hands.
It's another indication for me. Not liking guns is a profound force. It's a profound force, not liking them. Like there's the whole people just don't give a shit. They don't think about it. That's one kind of force we work against. The other force is I don't like them. And no self-respecting person would want a future that has them in it. We want a culture, a society that has no guns. But I think if you scraped a little more on those people, they would also be like, and no weapons, no guns. I don't know that anybody that would honestly be like, no guns in this society, but weapons are awesome. Nunchucks and fucking bow and arrow everywhere. They're not like that. Yeah. They don't like weapons. They don't like the idea of a society with weapons. And that can be completely in their subconscious and they hardly ever deal with it or hardly ever think about it. But when they do think about it, that's their first thought. It's preposterous that the human race would even have these things at all.
And I'd step that back even, one step further, which is one of the 5 lessons I draw in the conclusion of the book, is that it really has to do with violence. Right? Because, most people are like, oh, you want to use firearms for hunting? Well, I'm not, I wouldn't hunt myself, but okay, I can understand that. Or you want to go to the range and do some sports shooting? No problem. It's the defensive use of firearms that really bothers people. It's using weapons to inflict pain on other people that they, don't like. So I think underlying is really just, we wish for a society in which there was no violence, which I wish for too. And, for the vast majority of my life, I lived in a world where I wasn't subject to or fearful of, interpersonal violence. And so, that is just off my radar. And I think for a lot of people who dislike guns, who dislike weapons, they really just dislike violence.
It's making me think about Lawrence Keeley, the anthropologist. And he talks about in one of his books where the prevailing theory for a long time was that ancient humans were violent also and engaged in warfare. And that was just a baseline. Somewhere in the 60s, and the anthropology mindset that starts to change, coincidentally, from the 60s, is that you have the dominant theory or the dominant belief starts to become that no, ancient people didn't do that stuff. So, or if they did, it was not very much, right? So this is where when Pinker addresses the myth of the noble savage, this is where this comes from. It comes from the distaste, and this is what Keeley brings up in his book, the distaste for violence that was reinforced by the assassinations that happened in America in the 1960s allowed this particular portion in subculture and academia to try to reinvent reality based upon a distaste for violence. And so even Keeley believed it or started to get influenced by it until he did there was a project he was on where they did a dig and they found overwhelming evidence that there were defensive fortifications and spear tips and activity, and there was no way, right? And of course, his evidence wasn't the only evidence. There was also other emerging evidence that while the violence in ancient people was different, but it was pervasive. And so I'm bringing it up because you see when people really have this idealized worldview, they'll fucking change the entire reality. They'll bend the perception of reality with it. So I think perhaps will people do this with other subjects other than violence? Probably. But violence seems to be so deep that people's minds will start to bend the facts.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that same force is what we're talking about. It's what we're up against.
I could have used that information before I wrote that part of my conclusion. So thanks for holding that back.
It's in the Anthropillar. If you had read the whole thing, I know it's quite confusing and large. And
I think I've probably read the Anthropillar as much as anybody else out there other than you. So I'm surprised that part is fallen by the wayside in my mind.
It's in there. It's in there. I know if I want to fall asleep fast, other than taking melatonin or something or chamomile tea, there are 2 things that will do it: the Old Testament or the Anthropillar. Those 2 things right away, just like, and so projectiles. I'm kidding.
It was a big turning point for me. Maybe just in my mind, I didn't want you to, the head to grow too large since you already prominently profiled in one chapter. I didn't want you to be in the conclusion also. Subconsciously forgot about that part.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think, David, where I'm going to need to go to make my big splash here before I retire from the world of guns in the next 10 years, you might need some buffer between yourself and the old Ranster, because I'm going to time it with your retirement so that you won't pay prices for it. Something like that. But yeah, you definitely want to keep some space. That's for sure. You don't want to keep mentioning me and shit.
I wait every day for the other shoe to drop. I don't listen to every podcast episode as soon as it drops because I'm interested in what you have to say. I'm just worried about, do I have to cut ties with Randy today?
That's exactly how I want people to feel. Now I know. But you've noticed, I'm like, now that he's there, I'm going to go to his class and I'm not going to swear. I have to fucking be real about this. This is a huge thing. Maybe I can't keep myself from saying Hitler's nuts once, but I know I cannot really go off the rails. But for me, going off the rails isn't being crazy. It's just not being afraid of really opening somebody up and saying, no. Like, you people are off you're off. Right. And that's not going to go well. So that's sort of where I'm going in that direction. But
did you curse or say Hitler's nuts to the French journalists?
Good question. I said BS twice, I think.
The letters or the words?
BS. I just said BS.
Okay, the letter. Okay, so the letters.
Yeah, so I did though. Yes, I made sure that I wasn't going to do that. And you notice too in the Fox Business piece, she quotes me using the letters BS, and that's because I knew it was probably going to be all on me, the whole article. And so I said BS, and I did not say the F word, which, it's quite an accomplishment. But in terms of the French people, I did, when we weren't rolling, the longer the day got, the more Fs came out. So, but as you know, I am mindful here of our effects. We have a dynamic. Even Elsie brought this up. She was like, the thing is about you and David is you guys have an awesome dynamic because you're different, right? You guys are both different, but you share a phenomenal amount of space. And she knows me well. She knows I'm not all MF. And like my vast majority of my interactions with Elsie, I am speaking more like you. Right. So she's like, you guys both have all of this shared sensibility and like your patience and the way that you go about things. But then, you're on one side and David's on the other. So you both represent not being alike, but then you share. And she's like, that's like a super rare dynamic. And I agree. That's why I can't just go out and be like you and I are on, who knows, Chuck Todd's, whatever. And I'm like, Hitler's nuts. Like, that would be like the worst fucking thing they could possibly have. Well, Chuck, the thing is, let's talk about Hitler's nuts. I mean, that might be the end of our relationship. So not with Chuck Todd and with you. So I know I'm going to protect it.
Well, as Mr. Miyagi famously said, same but different.